Okay.
Hey Matthew, how's it going?
Very well. Good to see you.
Good, you as well. Thanks for coming back for the third time. We have some questions from the groups, the Cobain groups. So thank you for taking the time to come and answer those. I know that there are definitely a few really good ones here. And another thing before we get to those, though, that I wanted to talk to you about that was kind of my own question is, I've been doing some of my own research on the gun that that Kurt had in his hand when he was found dead. And to the best of my knowledge, the reason that we believe Kurt could have reached the trigger on that shotgun is because, well, we're really getting into it right off the bat here, but because Tom Grant said that he did some tests and that Kurt could reach the trigger. He said that he's quite a bit bigger than Kurt, and since he could reach it easily, he thought that Kurt would also be able to reach it. Had you ever heard Tom say anything like that about testing the gun or?
No, I do recall him watching some videos online of other people testing the gun. Um, if he had some replica of the gun, he never showed it to me. Um, and I don't know where he would test it.
Hmm.
I he was living in a rented room in someone else's house at the time I was dealing with him, and it's not like I never heard him mention of going to some kind of range or anything like that and testing something like that. Um, and I also know that Tom is a very, physically, he doesn't move very well.
Oh, I
You know,
see.
he's a physically unwell person. Just seeing Tom walk across the room, it's a challenge for him just to do that. So for him to be on the ground testing a shotgun, emulating it. I mean, I suppose it's possible, but I never heard him tell a story like that to me that he ever did any kind of tests like that.
That's interesting. And
And
of
so he
course,
certainly never invited me to participate in them. And I never saw a replica of the gun. I never heard about him doing any other tests. Um, if it happened, I was not privy to it.
okay. And so on Soaked in Bleach, obviously, that would have been something that I think we would have all expected, maybe Ben Statler to ask, or if that was the case, you'd think that Tom, maybe that would have been showcased in Soaked in Bleach. So, again, interesting that this is something that he's come out saying that Kurt could have reached the trigger. But as far as we know, there's some tests online and those were not done with the same gun. And I think it is, I'll just say that I have my doubts as to whether Tom did any sort of scientific testing on that gun. Um and that would be your assumption as well. You haven't heard that, so
No, no, that's
yeah.
news to me. I've never heard that one before.
What do you think about the length of the gun and Kurt's arm length and whether or not it's possible that he could reach the trigger?
I think it's certainly very unlikely. I mean, we know from the autopsy report, generally, I know at least one medical examiner I spoke to was surprised that the arms were not measured after such a death. And so his arms weren't measured, so we're not really sure what his reach was. Um,
True.
and so that should have been done, and the hands should have been bagged and tested to see if he had fired the weapon, and they were not. So we know that from the autopsy report. So I don't know what Kurt Cobain's reach was. But it wasn't, he was a tiny, frail guy. So it's a very hard claim to think that he could have reached the trigger and been strong enough to pull it, especially after being under extraordinary influence of drugs.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure why he would offer such a claim like that. I understand that one has to pose a counter argument once in a while in order to be thorough. But its counter argument doesn't seem to me that's really worth it. It seems to be a bit of a stretch. It doesn't seem to be a counter argument worth making since it's such an implausible scenario to offer.
Yeah. And I mean, a few of the experts that I've spoken with recently, and of course, this is always, you garner all these insights, has said that they believe that if it had been proven Kurt could not have reached the trigger, that the case would have been reopened years ago. So then one has to ask, why was that testing not done?
Yeah.
So that's my big question is why were we led to believe that Kurt could reach the trigger if real scientific testing wasn't done? Because clearly the case may have been there was a good chance the case would have been reopened if that was proven.
Yeah, yeah, a
So.
good question.
Yeah. So, okay. So I think, that's something that we're all working on. We did, one of the experts that we spoke to as well said that they believe that Kurt was lying down due to the trajectory of the pellets. So that would make it even more unlikely, I think, that he would have been able to reach that trigger.
Yeah,
Um,
he'd been lying down, then holding the gun up in the air, which would have been largely impossible. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
exactly. Okay, cool. So I'm going to move on to these questions here. So you talked to Fisk, is that correct?
Lieutenant Fisk from the fire department, correct.
Yes. Okay. So you interviewed him, and what people are kind of wondering is when we look at the death scene photos, there is an appearance that there is no broken glass. Did he tell you how he got in, where he broke the glass? Do you have
He broke
any?
the glass and then reached around into the handle and it reached around and then opened the door,
Okay.
in the handle.
So there
He
should be
did break
broken.
glass.
He did break glass. Okay. So then
He
he
did
reaches
break
around.
glass.
Okay.
I did ask him about that, and he is actually. He said he did something to the effect of since he's a fireman, he does know how to break glass without breaking too much, more than necessary.
Interesting.
You get good at it after a while. I'm sure that's true.
Yep.
So he broke just enough glass to open the door and no more. He doesn't like if you do enough of it as a fireman, my impression is you do the minimal amount of damage or vandalism. You don't want it to look like that. So you do the minimum amount in order to get the job done. So he did break a little bit of glass and then reached in and pulled the handle.
And of course, he said, he went in. The stool is not where it looks like it is, and according to the SPD reports, the stool it's sitting against the other doors,
Right.
correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's sitting against a Juliet balcony
Yeah.
facing the driveway.
Okay.
Correct.
Perfect. Okay, that's great. Was he helpful? Like, did you find was he receptive to talk? Because no one else had talked to him, but before you had, correct?
No, no one else had talked to him and asked him about the stool at the door, which that was, the first that was one of the first conversations I had when I realized that no one had ever really investigated the death of Kurt Cobain before. And I started getting nervous when I was actually, it was, I guess, interesting in a way when you come across this information. But then I would think, why wasn't this done already? Why didn't anyone else make this call? Why didn't Tom make this call? Because he was up there in the spring of 1994, apparently chasing down all these leads, but he doesn't chase down the most obvious ones. So why did he why did he not contact this fireman? It was an easy thing to do. I just got the report and made the call, and I was the first person to ever call him in and ask him about this stool again, wedged against the door. So I had several experiences like that, and that was one. But he was very helpful. He said the man was very obviously dead, and he turned around and left after he'd done his job because the police were there.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I mean, in that interview that I sent you recently of Tom, this was when Tom did Matt Bell's podcast, and he's talking about the gun. I had clipped it at a couple
Oh,
minutes so
right, I
you could
remember.
just
Hmm.
hear what he had to say about the gun. But he does say on that same interview something about that Courtney was not paying him to investigate anymore in Seattle, so he was not making those phone calls, which I found, a very interesting thing to say because in a way he's sort of admitting that he didn't really do much of an investigation because Courtney wasn't paying him to do that. But we get this sort of juxtaposing statements from him other times talking about all the investigating that he was doing and running down leads, et cetera. And like you said, I mean, he's back in California and he's still working for Courtney for a year and it doesn't sound to me like he's actually doing too much of you know, uh, even making phone calls. So,
Yeah, well, I wasn't getting paid to do it either, but I
well,
still made the phone
exactly.
call.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Yes,
So I don't know what
exactly.
that's supposed to mean.
Yeah, no, yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting. Did we talk about this? Like when you watch a movie like Fight Club and you look at things a certain way, and then when you realize Edward Norton doesn't exist, you're like, oh, you go back or sorry, Brad Pitt's character doesn't exist. You go back and rewatch it in a completely different light. So now I'm going and watching, old Tom Grant interviews and going like, oh, you know what I mean? Kind of watching
Oh
things in
yeah,
in the
yeah.
in the context of what we have now, and so that's been pretty interesting. Something you've been doing now for 10 years, I imagine.
I
But
don't watch a lot of interviews back anymore these days. I can't.
yeah, for sure, for
I
sure.
don't have the appetite for it.
Oh
But
my
go on,
gosh,
sorry.
for sure. No, no worries. Okay, so the next question was, the March 18th incident where the police come and confiscate Kurt's guns.
Oh yeah.
Um, And, he had an interview with a cop on the scene, and I believe that, he was very nice to Kurt. Kurt was very nice, and Kurt was telling the police officer, no, I'm not suicidal. Like, go ahead and take the guns. I'm just hiding from my wife. Have you done any research into that incident? Do you have anything
Yeah,
that you
I was
can
the
add?
first person to ever. That was another situation where it was a detective, Everett Edwards is his name. And this was one of those, he had never been called. He was one of the officers on the scene that day. He had never been called and asked about this. And when I looked into this incident, um, I went through all the proper channels. Seattle Police Department fully authorized this interview. They gave me no opposition at all to conduct this interview. It was fully authorized through the Media Affairs Office. And he was a detective. And now I believe he's retired, but Detective Everett Edwards. Um, he, I forget what he was a robbery detective, I believe, but he was on patrol at that time. And on that day, when you get called, they respond to the 911 call and they pull in. And the story that was in the press and that lots of people claimed, Courtney Love claimed, that was that Kurt Cobain had been locked in the bathroom and had a gun and was threatening suicide. And so when I asked the police officer about this, no one ever called and asked about this before. He didn't know there was any suspicion over Kurt Cobain's death. He was unaware of it. And he said that he found Kurt Cobain standing in the backyard with his hands in his pockets, just very embarrassed that his wife had called 911, just deeply embarrassed. So he was just standing there, sort of shuffling around. And Officer Edwards then walks up to him, talks to him, asks him, how's it going? Kurt's very apologetic, very sorry. Oh, it's just my wife. I'm so very sorry. They walk down the driveway. They get in a police car. They have a nice conversation. Kurt is civil. He's not under the influence. He's fine. He's apologetic. He's deeply embarrassed by the entire incident and couldn't have been more polite to Detective Edwards. And that was pretty much the end of it. And then they interviewed Courtney afterwards, and she said, she admitted she made the entire thing up. So I thought that was actually when I wrote that chapter in the book I wrote, that was my favorite chapter, and for myself at least, I really like getting that one and telling that story. Um, it was interesting. Tom was on an interview with Dave Schrader on Coast to Coast um, a while back, and I think Ben Statler was on the interview too. And Dave Schrader was asking him, he was not interested in Soaked in Bleach so much or in what Tom had done. He was most interested in that story. And he kept bringing it up during the interview. And I listened to him and I go, gee, Tom going to mention my name once in this? No, no one's going to bring me up. No, you going to take credit for this? Really? And I just thought, wow, how do you get away with that? Now, when I did that story, I did realize at this time that Tom had not really investigated the death of Kurt Cobain and had been kind of taking credit for the research I had done, claiming it was his own. I had begun to suspect this. So at that time, there was a writer named Sean Helton who was very interested in the story and very interested in the death of Kurt Cobain, the whole story, the entire story. And so I contacted him and I said, I put this chapter in my book. I'm going to give you an advanced look at it and you can write an article about it if you like. And he did. And I let him check my research as well. I let him put him in touch with Detective Edwards and confirm the story, confirm the sourcing. I did all that. And he wrote it up for something called, I think it's called 21st Century Newswire. I don't know if that still exists. And he called it The Myth of March 18th. So I was very happy to have Sean Helton write that. But at any rate, so that was one incident, but it did alarm me because I didn't understand why Tom didn't look into it himself. He was there. He was up there in the spring. He was supposed to be investigating the death of Kurt Cobain, and you don't look into this. It's not even that hard to do. I just, I don't get it. So it's well, here's how I think about it, and there's a certain way I think about the Cobain case that perhaps other people don't. Um, okay, we all know if you look at the correspondence with Sheila Lowe, for example, uh, Sheila Lowe, Tom claims, and this is dramatized in the book I write and in Soaked in Bleach, that Courtney finds him out of the Yellow Pages. Just
Yep.
randomly picks him up. As
Yep.
if Courtney Lowe didn't know any guys who could do any kind of last minute dirty work or any kind of PIs in Los Angeles. She didn't know any people like that at all. No, no, not. That's not possible. She didn't. So she had to go in the Yellow Pages. That himself is not very plausible, but we'll let that go. Okay, Tom says she found him in the Yellow Pages. Um, but and this is April of 1994, but we see in the correspondence with Sheila Lowe in the summer of 1994, he writes her a letter and says, when she's demanding payment, says, I'm waiting for the Yellow Pages to come out because I have an ad in the Yellow Pages so I can get more business. So it's like, and when I saw that letter for the first time, I thought, oh boy, I've really been conned. It just changed everything for me. And I thought, oh, he didn't get hired out of the Yellow Pages at all. And of course, in the police reports claim that Courtney's attorneys hired him.
Right.
So he did not get hired on the Yellow Pages. That story is almost certainly false. Okay, now if he gets hired in the Yellow, he has this story that I write up and that Ben Stiller dramatizes getting hired. This story is almost certainly false.
Correct. Yep.
Sunday, April 3rd. Okay, if this is a fabricated story, then that story must have a purpose. What is the purpose of the story? Well, if you read the story or watch the story or read the story I wrote, I don't know, I can't recall what's in Soaked in Bleach, how they dramatized it, but Tom Grant, Courtney Love, Eric Arlenson, and Ben Klugman, where are they on Sunday, April 3rd? They're all in Los Angeles, right? So I
Right.
realized when I read that letter from Sheila Lowe, I said, oh my gosh, this is an alibi. And I have helped to dramatize it.
Shit.
So
Yeah.
I
Right.
was used. I realized this like a thunderbolt. I realized this. I said I was taken advantage of and used to facilitate an alibi. I thought I was exposing a crime. I wasn't. I was facilitating an alibi, and I was being used in this capacity. So and I felt like when I realized this, I had no one I could talk to about it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Thought, oh boy, I really have been conned. Okay, so now what does this mean? Now, if you stay with this story of Sunday, April 3rd, um, after they have this meeting at the Peninsula Hotel from the Yellow Pages hiring, okay, it's not flattering. She's in there doing drugs or whatever with her groupies, but that's what makes it all the more convincing and mildly unflattering, but not really for her.
Yeah.
And
It's part of her shtick for
yeah,
sure.
exactly.
Yep.
I mean, there's kind of it looks cool in a way, I suppose. And after they leave, he and Klugman leave the hotel room. Tom says, oh, my spider sense is tingling. I'm going to record all the conversations from now on. Okay. Well, I mean, I know Tom well enough. I know how slow he processes things. There was no way that story is true, that clicked right away from him. I'm going to start recording right now. So this means we have a staged suicide. Now that argument is well enough to anyone who's interested in what you and I are talking about right now, watching
Hmm.
this. We have a staged suicide. We also have a staged investigation.
Right.
Staged suicide, staged investigation. That's the way I think of it. Those two staged activities. And I think people understand the first part, but don't understand the second part. And because it hasn't been communicated well enough, that's why people don't understand it. And probably by me as well. I haven't communicated it. And but that's how I look at it. Now, and I think it's at least the staged investigation, the staged quality is at least it could be staged in part or it could be staged in full. I'm not
So is
entirely sure.
that why you sort of waffle between you think that Kurt may have been killed earlier than the fourth? Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure of the dating.
Right. So you know that Tom believes that Kurt was killed on the 3rd. That is his personal belief or
Yeah.
what he communicated
Yes,
to
I
me.
knew
I'm
that,
sure
but he
he,
never
yeah,
explained why.
right. Okay. And then again, we've talked about that thing where he says, well, I can prove Dylan wasn't there. And you're like, you can prove where Dylan was from the 2nd,
Yeah.
when Kurt got
Yeah,
out of
exactly.
Exodus till the 5th, because you don't know when he was killed, right? So, of course, we know that he would have to be doing that. So was that a slip up? I mean, so, and again, was he, like you said, I don't know how deep it goes, whether he was just, I believe exactly what you said. He was working, I think he was probably working for Rosemary and Danny, as his clients for that
Yeah.
credit card fraud case. That's sort of, we both read that PDF that was written up, and I'm not sure
Hmm.
what your conclusions were there, but that sort of makes sense to me. I could be wrong. But yes, I don't believe the Yellow Pages story for 1 minute. And then again, so now how do we make sense of the stage investigation? Why would Courtney want Tom to continue for 30 years to say that Kurt was murdered when he could have just let it go?
Yeah, very good question. I, I don't know who else is in on it, but I do think other people are in on it.
For sure.
Um, for example, one thing I didn't explain before. I don't think I've ever explained this before, actually. So, in my dealings with Tom, um, Tom would be there's such a thing as being angry or agitated, where you get upset over something. And then there's such a thing as being in trouble. And there are two different forms of agitation. So, for example, you might get upset over something that someone does or something that doesn't go as well as you had, the way you wanted.
Yeah.
But it's a different kind of agitation when you get in trouble with, say, an employer or a spouse
Yeah.
or a parent. Being upset and being in trouble are two
Yes.
different things. I can't, we recognize it when we see it, but I couldn't verbalize it, the distinction. But we all recognize it. We all know what it is when we experience it in ourselves or in others. So, for example, when I talked earlier about Tom when he was upset over the fact that Ben Statler was going to call Callie DeWitt,
Yes.
he wasn't angry. He was in trouble, right?
Interesting.
And so I several times I had got the sense that there was an offstage actor in the story that that Tom was responding to, but I didn't know who it was. But I could sense that there was an offstage actor there. He was in trouble sometimes. When he got upset over um, Donnie Icar on Soaked in Bleach asking for the original tapes, he was in trouble. He
Right.
wasn't upset. It's different. When I got the publishing deal from Wild Blue Press, and I had that open door to the Seattle police chief,
Hmm.
and he sabotaged that. He was upset, but more than that, he was in trouble. And I sensed that he was responding to some offstage actor, and I didn't know who that was. It wasn't just coming from him.
Right.
And I wasn't sure, this was a growing suspicion of mine over time. And it just grew stronger and stronger, and it came up on occasion. And he once, a few years ago, um, the Eric Blanc
Yep.
put out some videos, and he put my name on the videos, but I didn't know about it. And I didn't have an advanced preview of the videos. He said I was participating in videos, and I mean, he took it off. I asked him to take it off, and I'm not. It doesn't bother me anymore. But he did put these videos out, and Tom did this freak out to me online once, really in a full panic. And I remember, like, oh boy, he's really scared about this. But I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't even know about the video that Eric was putting out, and Tom knew, but I didn't. But he was really frightened, like he was in trouble. And so sometimes Tom does these things. He gets into trouble. He doesn't just get upset. So who's he getting into trouble with? I don't know. But I'm telling you, he gets into trouble with somebody. We
Very
don't know who it
interesting.
is. No.
And of course we've all seen, I mean, he tends to run right to mental illness when he, starts to say, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, Matthew's mentally ill. I'm a
Yeah.
narcissist." We've got all these insults that are slung against us,
Yeah.
which I mean, anyone who, yes, we all have our faults, but anyone who's ever listened to us talk understands that that's not quite correct. And as
Yeah.
we know, we know the stuff he says about Joe. Um, but yeah, it's very interesting. And I do think another thing that's interesting is that I think you said this in the last one. He always needs enough time, maybe, to be contacting someone. So when he's responding to
Yes.
things, you said this before, didn't you?
Yeah. He
Yeah.
says, I have to work on a response. I need about 1 second to respond to something. If
Yeah,
someone says something to me or accuses me of something.
totally.
That's about it. I'm ready anytime.
Yeah.
Now, I'm working on a response. I'm going to get back to you. And that always sounds to me like he's getting his response cleared by another person, some offstage actor or actors, whoever that is.
I wonder if that's what he was doing with Dylan because he said, "Yes, I'm going to prove Dylan was not there when Kurt was killed." And then he never did. He just came out and called Joe a whole bunch of names. So I wonder if he tried to kind of work something and they couldn't come up with anything that would make even, a slight remote bit of sense. And so they just went with name calling. But, again, this is supposition, but, we're trying to figure out how and why this has happened. I mean, somebody said to me the other day, they said he, he's a confidence man. On the surface, he gives you enough to go, "You're right. Oh, that is weird about Kurt's
Yeah.
death." And then you dig in just a little bit further and you're like, "Oh, wait, this can all be disproven really easily."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then, so maybe, again, I'm just supposing, what if, Courtney knows that sells records, that's going to sell. People think Kurt was murdered. That's going to sell merchandise and it's going to keep, nothing sells better than dead rock stars. But when somebody really looks into it, they watch, Soaked in Bleach, or they, read the case manual, and they go, "Huh, well, I can prove there was, cadaveric spasm wasn't real." Like all of
Yeah.
these things that we talk about that are these like very surface level reasons that, that we're told Kurt didn't take his own life. And then you go, "Huh. Oh, there are really good reasons we know Kurt didn't take his own life, but most of those came from other research." So I don't know. I find it very, very strange. I have a few more questions here. Um, so Camille Besser and the incident backstage with Courtney so I'll just let people know what this is. This is from what, 99 when you talked to Camille?
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. And so her and her friend were at a show, at a whole show, and I believe they had signs up, something saying, "You murdered Kurt," or "Justice for Kurt," something like that,
Something
that
like that. Yeah.
irritated Courtney, and they ended up getting brought backstage. Is that
So they claim. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So that was the claim. And so how did you come upon Camille Besser and how did you
She
make that
reached out
happen?
to me somehow, but I don't recall,
Okay.
um, and told me her story, and I thought it was convincing enough, her story. And she had a witness with her who confirmed the story.
Oh, that's
And
cool. Okay.
I thought it was interesting, but it was their claim, not mine. Um, uh, make of it what you will. I haven't, it's not, I haven't heard from the woman in many years.
And so do you have others? I mean, you don't obviously have to share the stories, but do you have other stories like that where people have reached out to you where you're like, "Huh," you're like it's kind of third hand witnesses saying that Courtney's told them, that she was responsible?
No, I haven't had too many. I've had people who have told me that she has made jokes and things like that about it, like in a kind of dark humor. But I've had a few people tell me that over the years, but no one's nothing like an outright like candid conversation about it.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. What are your thoughts on El Duce and Alan Wrench? We touched on this a little bit before, but have you looked much into that, or has that sort of been
I have not looked that much into that. I found the Allen wrench story implausible because I thought that someone would not brag about killing him like that if he'd really done so. I thought that was just kind of a weird story. Something sounded off about it. The El Duce story, Tom never gave any kind of answer for why he didn't believe El Duce or Alan Lynch at all. None,
Right.
which made me slightly suspicious. The El Duce story, I don't know. Tom didn't like talking about it.
Hmm.
I know that. And I always wondered if Tom felt somehow responsible for the man's death, but I don't
Interesting.
know. But I don't know. I didn't look into it myself. He was already dead by the time I became interested in the story, and I found him to be a very unsavory character. So I didn't really want to talk to any of his friends or anything like that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Can you tell me what you know about Kurt's time in Exodus? And Courtney was apparently leaving him a bunch of messages. He wasn't speaking with her. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you researched about his time in Exodus?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Nobody ever, it sounded when I called the head of Exodus Recovery, and they were in a different location now, they still exist. Um, I was the only person to ever call, first person to ever call and ask about Kurt Cobain's day, which I found to be mind-boggling. This is the kind of thing just drove me nuts after a while. And Tom was living in LA, and he could have just driven over there. And why am I the person calling and asking about this? No one ever called. Apparently, there was a surveillance video that may no longer exist that shows Kurt there.
Um,
No evidence that he ever jumped over the wall,
right,
and he walked out the front door. When you checked in, I now they don't tell you a lot about a patient's stay because patient confidentiality is very important to them, which I understand. So I didn't get anything about his stay at all.
right,
Nothing.
for sure. Yep.
What I did get was that he checked out. And when you check in with your wallet, your keys, any kind of valuables. You must check them in at the desk
Oh,
because they don't want people to lose them in their room and then be responsible for that afterwards. And they don't want people to try to check out and say, "Oh, I can't find my wallet. I can't find my keys." Oh, what? So you have to check those in. So for him to jump over the wall, he would have to jump over the wall without his keys and his wallet. Well, that wasn't going to work. So he didn't jump over the wall. He walked right
okay.
out the front door.
So where did we get that from? Why was that in soaked in bleach? Like,
I
where did
don't
that come
know.
from?
I don't know, but I
Okay.
know when I was talking to Tom about it, he told me he didn't want me to say anything about it because he didn't want me to upset any of Ben Statler or any of the people in the film because they were going to spend all this money to try to film the scene. And I'm just like, I don't care. I mean, the facts are the facts. I'm not going to sit there and twist them just because it
It
might
looks
work well in a
better.
movie or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
And why not just tell Ben Statler right now, and so he doesn't have to, hire actors and waste a bunch of money depicting a scene that didn't happen. It just didn't make any sense to me. So, but no one ever looked into it. It's mind-boggling. I don't know why. You would think if you're going to make the claim that you investigated the death of Kurt Cobain, that you might do it
You
just to cover your tracks, even,
you would think.
you know? But
Matthew, he had you
that didn't
doing
even
it.
happen.
He just had you investigating it. It's
Yeah, and
fine.
then take credit for it afterwards.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Um, so I have one more question here, and then I have my own question for you as well. Have you ever spoken to Courtney or
Yes,
received?
I have.
You have. Okay. So
I have.
do you mind elaborating on that?
Yeah, we in Manhattan. I met Courtney at a it was like a bar restaurant in downtown Manhattan, and apparently it was around Soho. Apparently she was living around there at the time, and we had a polite and civil conversation, and she knew exactly who I was.
She did.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
knew exactly who I was. Yeah,
Okay.
and so she's a big woman, and she is makes real eye contact with you when you speak to her. Looks
Interesting.
directly into your eyes.
Okay.
Um,
Interesting.
yeah. So, but it was very polite, very civil, and she was very complimentary of me. And
Hmm.
yeah, and I thought it was something of a test. And to be honest, and but I think she also knew I wasn't afraid of her. So, but it was perfectly fine. She was perfectly nice. Didn't threaten me
Interesting.
or anything like that. Not at all.
Okay. So there's never been any threats made towards you. Have you
Oh yeah, I've had
received?
threats made toward
Oh
me.
yeah.
Sure. Oh
Okay,
yeah,
but not
plenty of
from
them.
directly from Courtney.
No, 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 not from her directly.
Okay.
No. Well, I've had
Okay.
plenty of them. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was going to say you must have had a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
threads
Oh
at
boy,
this
yeah.
point.
Oh, I had a
Yeah.
lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So my question is, I know that the book on Amazon, it's still on Kindle so that you can edit it, and change things. I know you had mentioned before that you're always making sure that, every things are grammatically correct, etc.
Oh, I haven't
Um,
done that in years, but yeah,
oh, okay.
the one time I did. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Would you ever consider writing a book about this entire bizarre experience of this case? Because there's a lot. I wonder
I don't
too if
know.
you put everything down in a, if we all come together and put everything down in a timeline. I mean, you have so much information that I wonder if not even just solving the case wise, but figuring out why certain things, why Tom's done things, why certain things, like you said, if there's a lie, there's a reason for that lie. What can we,
Yeah.
trace this back to? I mean, of course, that's another huge project, but I mean, I feel like at some point that well, we would all love it. I don't know if that's something you have the time or
If
energy
you
for,
know, if
but
a couple more puzzle pieces came together, I would consider it. Um, but there are still a few out there missing. But if I came across a couple more, I would definitely consider it. Sure.
that would be great. Yeah, I think we would all love that. And we're now in a time where we can, you can obviously release books in different ways and you're not beholden to a partner on doing another book, right?
No,
So a
yeah,
partner
no,
that's
no, I won't
trying
do that
to
again. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Sorry, one last question. How do you feel about Joe Burns right now? I know you've known him for a long time. How do you feel about his statement and kind of everything that's transpired? I mean, not how he is doing mentally or et cetera, but just how do you feel about his statement and the way that's being received?
I'm not sure how it's being received. So, so the reception of it, I'm not actually following at all. But how do I feel about his statement? Well, I do think, like any statement, you'd like to be able to corroborate it. There were other people there that night,
Yeah.
and I would love to see his statement corroborated by other people who were there. Uh, so I believe Joe's statement is credible, but I would love to see corroboration. I'd like it not to stand alone. And
Yeah.
there are people out there who can corroborate it in part or in full.
Yeah.
And I think that is really the key to the both, or one key to the story and to Joe's story. I think Joe's story, someone else, I tend to think someone else will come forward, but I think that is what really needs to happen. I think for the statement to just stand alone is, it's interesting, but I don't think it's going to move the needle much if it's just alone. Someone else has to say, yes, I was there too, and I saw some of the same things.
Yeah,
I think when
I
we get to
agree.
that moment, then that will mean something.
I agree. Now, sorry, super quickly, have you ever spoken to Callie?
No, I tried, but it didn't go
Okay.
anywhere.
Oh, okay. I see. I see. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what we're going to hope. I know that we're all sort of on working on forensics behind the scenes. I know you've done tons of research towards that, et cetera. And I'm hoping we find out a little bit more about the gun very soon, working on now. Again, it's like this whole case, and I know you've been doing this for years now, but you go, okay, this is what I thought I knew. Okay, well,
Yeah,
let's go back to the start and figure out, again, if this is not correct, And so it's about removing those assumptions and what you were talking about. Again, how to get across the suicide was not the only setup here,
yeah,
and getting people to think like that, because even me, and I've talked to you a lot, and I've experienced a lot of this stuff firsthand with Tom, unfortunately, but I still fall back on, oh, maybe it's just his ego. You
yeah,
still fall
yeah,
back on that because it's the only thing that you can sort of process or that makes sense. So, but I think the more people that come forward, I'm sure you get emails all the time and we get messages talking about other people's experiences. And I think, once we can sort of put all that together, again, moving forward with the case, hopefully, like you said, someone else will come forward. And then, we're all working on forensics behind the scenes. So, if the forensics that you have and our team has, and, we'll all I mean, we're going to have a lot, I think. I keep thinking 2025 is going to be the year that we're really going to see some traction on this case. So that's my hope. And then I'm hoping you get a few of those puzzle pieces because I really, you know that your book is was my favorite of all the books that I read on the subject. So I'm hoping that you can end up doing another one.
Well, if the opportunity, if things really move and open up, then I'd be very willing to do that. Um,
Perfect.
the thing about the Cobain case is I don't understand it either, why Tom does what he does. I, we don't have the full story. We'll probably never get it. I think that the Cobain case, if it is to move forward, it has to move beyond Tom Grant.
Oh,
No question
100%.
about that.
Yes.
That has to happen. I believe that over the years, I don't doubt this, that people have conned Tom and given him information, useful information. And I believe he's
Interesting.
received it and that it's gone nowhere. And I think, and I wonder if that real is part of Tom's purpose, is to make sure the information goes to a certain place and no farther, you know.
That's a really good insight. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
but
makes sense. Because that's what we thought, when you and I were talking about this even back in the day when we worked together with Joe and we were saying like we need a website so that people can actually reach out to us instead of reaching out to Tom where they may have been
yeah,
unsuccessful. We know that Tom has been, and this is not, I'm not alleging this. This is, I've seen this myself. He's been rude to people. He's told people that they're lying. When
yeah,
they tell him something like the reception from Tom has not always, certainly can't speak for everyone, but it's not always been what people would want it to be. And who are they going to go to? The SPD for a closed
right,
case? There's nowhere else
right,
for them to go, right? So
right.
that's, hopefully people knowing that you're still working on it, they can reach out to you, knowing that they can reach out to us. And I think that hopefully a few more of those pieces will fall into place. But yeah, so thank you so much for going over all those questions and talking about the case. I know you've been doing it forever, and we really appreciate your insights on everything.
Yeah,
So
I'm very happy to do it. I don't know what Tom's goal is, or who Tom's working with all these years, or what the goal is. It seems to be, I some people contact me and they think Tom is the killer and the guy with the gun in his hands. It's that bad. He's turned people off so much that people go to that conclusion.
yeah,
I don't quite go there, but people do. They
yeah,
think he's such a distasteful person that he's so rude and so insolent. They think, oh, this guy must be, have blood on his hands. I tend to think he's in some sort of middle area, but again, I could be wrong. Of He seems to want to keep the case alive, but not go too far.
yes,
He
that's
seems to want
exactly what
to
I feel.
he seems to want to tread water, but never make it to shore. And there's a kind of, it seems to me to be kind of strategy almost to do that. And I don't know why that would be, but I tend to think that did not have, I don't know what his involvement was before Kurt Cobain died, but I don't believe he had foreknowledge of what was happening. But I do believe he has a deeper level of involvement than he's admitted, certainly.
Yes,
And he probably got caught up in some story and caught up in this drama and does not know how to extricate himself from it. He
yes,
probably also is hoping that there will be some sort of narrow window of opportunity where he can, you know, on some level, he probably does believe that there's a wrong that was committed that should be righted, but he doesn't know how to to make it to make it happen where he doesn't get burned in the process.
that
You
makes
know,
sense.
C.S. Lewis has this describes vice a certain way. He says that, every vice has a grain of virtue in it, and that grain of virtue will deceive us
Interesting.
and
Yeah.
have us mistake a vice for a virtue. In the similar way, Tom has a mixture of motives, and I think probably one of the motives is to right or wrong, but then he has all these other complicated motives of self-preservation and such that overwhelm it. And people see this guy who wants to right or wrong, and they think, "Oh, okay, this is it. We're gonna get behind this, and we're gonna support this guy, and this guy really means means to move the needle on this. And
Yeah.
then he sabotages it at the last minute. And it happens over and over and over and over again. So something very complicated he is going on with his motives and his involvement. And I don't have the full picture here, but I think it's undeniable that that's the situation that he is in, and that we can no longer rely on him to accomplish anything when
Yeah.
it comes to the death of Kurt Cobain. Nothing. I
And
mean, we
that's
talked about this recently with the question of the autopsy report.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's I think another important thing to say is people say, why do we have to talk about Tom? It doesn't matter. Well, that'll all come out later, when the case gets reopened. And I think, it's important because again, we need to start thinking differently, start looking at the case from a completely fresh perspective and going, okay, but what if this happened? And, what if we can't trust any of this? And like, let's start looking
Yeah.
at it fresh. So I think that's very important. And then we never know what a key component to the case could be, if we figure something out about, where Tom was at a certain time or et cetera, will that provide some other, insight onto as to what happened to Kurt? So I think it's still very important to figure out as much as we possibly can. Like you said, we're never going to know it all. We're never going to know exactly what happened to Kurt either, but as close as we can get, and I think we have a lot of really clever people, working on it now, which is again somewhere that I don't think the case has been for a long time because they're like, well, Tom's working on it, that we've got this guy working on it. If he can't get it solved, we're not going to get it solved. But
Right, right.
now we kind of, I think, have other people who are working behind the scenes and working on this who are clever and motivated to actually get this moving forward. Um, so thank you so much. Matthew, can you stay on with me for two shakes after this? I just want to
Sure.
tell you something quickly. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much. If there are other questions, I'll let you know and we'll see if you maybe want to come back and do another one. But I think everyone's going to be really excited to hear what you had to say, and I super appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Have a good one.
You too.